Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. The New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, or NYSERDA, and the Department of Public Service staff welcome you to this technical conference relating to the Brooklyn Clean Energy Hub proposed by Con Edison in the Public Service Commission case 20-E-0197. I'm Gregory Lampman, the Director of Offshore Wind at NYSERDA, and I'll be joined today by several representatives from Con Edison. The purpose of this technical conference is to provide a forum for Con Edison to outline the Brooklyn Clean Energy Hub proposal and for offshore wind developers, transmission developers, and other interested parties to ask any questions they may have regarding the proposal, including certain technical feasibility questions raised by commenters in case 20-E-0197 and respondents to NYSERDA's RFI regarding the recently released offshore wind solicitation. For clarity, NYSERDA and DPS staff will not be discussing or addressing questions on the NYSERDA offshore wind solicitation or any other matters in this technical conference. But before we turn to the technical conference over to the Consolidated Edison team, a few announcements and reminders for participants. Get the next slide, please. First, if you're experiencing any technical issues, please feel free to contact Sal Graven at the email address on the bottom of this slide. This webinar is being recorded, and the recordings and presentation slides will be available on the Public Service Commission's website under case 20-E-0197. Additionally, the expectation is that the PSC Secretary will be issuing a notice in the case providing additional opportunity for interested parties to file comments relating to the Con Edison presentation. All participants have been muted. Some questions have been submitted in advance, and these will be addressed over the course of the presentation and in the Q&A. We will also have time for Q&A following the presentation, so please use the Q&A function to submit your questions to the presenters at any time. Next slide, please. Additionally, before we get to the presentation, I would also like to announce that NYSERDA is seeking requests to participate in a public technical webinar relating to offshore wind interconnection in New York. The purpose of this upcoming webinar will be to provide a forum for parties wishing to present proposed solutions for offshore wind interconnection to the offshore wind project developers and other interested parties. It will also provide an opportunity for participants to ask questions of those presenters. If you are interested in presenting, please follow the guidance on this slide. The information and more details will be provided shortly later this afternoon via an email from the offshore wind team to NYSERDA's offshore wind email list. Can I get the next slide, please? I will now turn the duration of the technical conference over to the Con Edison team. Presenting first will be Walter Avalardo, the Vice President of Systems and Transmission Operations at Con Edison. Welcome, Walter.
Thanks, Greg, and good afternoon. If we can go to the next slide, please. So good afternoon. My name is Walter Alvarado, and I have the privilege of being Vice President for System and Transmission Operations at Con Edison. Today, I, along with Deidre, Maggie, Brad, and Martin, will present on the Brooklyn Clean Energy Hub. Next slide, please. The stunning view of the Manhattan skyline reinforces Con Edison's role. We operate complex energy delivery systems in a manner that best serves our communities. We've been energizing the greatest city in the world for 200 years now. Throughout that time, the employees of Con Edison have pioneered the transformation of energy systems and will continue to innovate moving forward. The Brooklyn Clean Energy Hub is the latest example of our innovation. We are committed to the clean energy transition and a future that includes connecting many offshore wind projects to our grid. The goal of today's tech conference is to provide additional technical details of the hub that offshore wind developers are seeking and answer questions previously submitted. And as Greg outlined, additional questions can be submitted via the Q&A panel. Next slide, please. We plan, develop, operate, and maintain what is probably the world's most complex electrical transmission system. Based on a Niso interconnection queue, this slide demonstrates the significant interest driven by the state's clean energy goals in connecting to our system. As we look forward to connecting offshore wind projects to our grid, some of the challenges that developers face include, first, limited points of interconnection. Our system is tight. As you can see on this slide, most of our substations have limited interconnection options, with few that can accommodate the size of proposed offshore wind projects. Second, the limited interconnection options present cost uncertainty to connect to our system. The remaining points of interconnection will require significant upgrades. In some cases, The expense has prohibited developers from moving forward with their projects. Next is the scheduling challenge when connecting to one of our existing substations. Outage coordination will take years to complete. Our current outage season runs from September to May with additional limitations during the winter. As load increases due to the electrification of heating, the risk to meeting a schedule may increase as the outage windows get tighter and tighter. Our West 49th Street 345 kV station, shown upper mid portion of this slide here, presents some of these challenges. Some have stated that this station is a superior location for offshore wind. We know that's not the case. During a recent class year, a developer looking to connect over 1,100 megawatts of generation, comparable in size to offshore wind projects currently in the queue, faced the challenge of over $300 million in upgrades and an optimistic schedule of 10 years to connect. Considering the challenges just mentioned, the Brooklyn Clean Energy Hub is an option for developers as they prepare their bids for NYSERDA's current solicitation. Our Brooklyn Clean Energy Hub will provide make-ready points of interconnections and minimize the challenges with cost and schedule that developers currently face and will face in the future without the Brooklyn Clean Energy Hub. Deidre Altobel, Chief Engineer of Transmission Planning, and Maggie Walters, Chief Engineer of Transmission Line Engineering, will provide additional technical details for this exciting project. Brad Weiner, Director of Transmission Project Development, and Martin Pasick, Section Manager in Transmission Planning, will then lead the Q&A. At this point, I'll hand it over to Deidre Altobel, and thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Deirdre Altobel, Chief Engineer of Transmission Planning at Con Edison. My team is responsible for the long-term planning of Con Edison's transmission system, maintaining reliability as we seek to integrate clean energy resources into our daily operations. Next slide, please. The agenda for today is on the screen. First, we'll briefly review some of the background and give an overview of the Brooklyn Clean Energy Hub project, reviewing its design, construction, and other considerations during the project's planning stage. Then I'll turn it over to Maggie Walters, who will review the engineering considerations, options for routing approaches, cable interconnections, and developer cost responsibilities. Finally, I'll review NYSO's process considerations for the hub before turning it over to Brad Weiner, who will lead the question and answer session. As a reminder, please submit your questions in the chat during the course of the presentation as they arise, so we can respond at the end of the presentation session. Next slide, please. Oops. Con Edison identified the Brooklyn Energy Hub as an initial step to integrate offshore wind into its New York State transmission system. Offshore wind was identified as a goal in the Accelerated Renewable Act. Subsequently, NYSERDA and DPS staff commissioned a report called the Power Grid Study by Brattle. The Power Grid Study reinforced the need for the hub by noting that New York City is an advantageous place to interconnect large amounts of offshore wind due to its strong transmission system and high load density, but faces challenges with limited points of interconnection, thus requiring the need for local upgrades such as the hub to create additional points of interconnection. The January 2022 PSC order authorized Con Edison to file a petition for approval and cost recovery, citing heavily from the Power Grid Study. We filed the petition on April 15th and are here today to provide offshore wind developers certain answers to certain technical questions on the Brooklyn Clean Energy Hub project so that it can be considered in developing responses to the current and future NYSERDA offshore wind RFPs. Next slide, please. What is the Brooklyn Clean Energy Hub project? It is a substation project with a primary objective to create new points of interconnection on the Con Edison system for large resources such as offshore wind. It includes a new substation, the Brooklyn Hub, with 6 new points of interconnections, or POIs. Additionally, the project will relocate 2 feeders from a neighboring substation, Farragut, which in turn will open up 2 bus positions for additional points of interconnection at that substation. When completed, the hub project will enable a total of 8 new points of interconnection, or POIs, that can support the injection of up to 6,000 megawatts. The hub project cost is estimated to be about $1 billion. It uses existing utility property next to Farragut Station in Brooklyn, which will be reviewed in more detail by Maggie later on in this presentation. The company will utilize competitive procurement processes for things like design and construction contracting. Most importantly, as you'll see in upcoming slides, the Brooklyn hub will be integrated into and electrically connected to a central part of the Con Edison's local transmission system. It's a good location for connecting offshore wind because customer load is easily accessible, and its design will improve system resiliency and reliability. Next slide, please. The Brooklyn hub is a make-ready 345 kV transmission substation. That is, the entire station will be designed, constructed, and built to include all the infrastructure needed to accept offshore wind injections on day one. It will be the only substation in the Con Edison system ready to accept large injections without requiring substantive upgrades that are normally the responsibility of the developer. The hub is designed to be a 345 kV double ring bus with 20 circuit breakers and 14 feeder positions. While a double ring bus is not a typical design adopted by neighboring utilities, it is a design that has been commonly used in Con Edison's system for many years. As I have already alluded to, the hub location is good because it can geographically and electrically accept large volumes of renewable injections. Because the hub is a new substation, it will be constructed from the live system and can be ready to go into service by the end of 2027. Essentially, the station can be built and once ready, schedule outages to connect the required feeders to place it in service. As such, sequencing of nearby live equipment outages and alignment with allowable outage windows to perform major construction work is significantly minimized. We expect the initial 6 POIs and 6 outlet feeders to be in service by the end of 2027, followed by the additional POIs, 2 additional outlet feeders, and load connections by the summer of 2032. In contrast, modifications inside an existing live substation anywhere else on the Con Edison system would require more complex outage coordination and ultimately take more time to complete a project. Maggie will speak more to this later, but the key point here is that constructing a new station creates schedule and timing efficiencies that can't be realized when expanding existing stations. Next slide, please. The Brooklyn hub will enhance both system resiliency and reliability. Instead of constructing an open-air substation, the hub will be an enclosed building to protect equipment from a harsh weather environment. Storm hardening has also been accounted for by designing for a higher level of flood protection, 5 feet above the 2015 FEMA requirement. System reliability is also enhanced. By reconfiguring existing feeder connections and moving load from Farragut to the Brooklyn hub, Con Edison is diversifying the supply sources to customer load, which could help minimize the impact of an extreme contingency that could propagate throughout our system. As the system experiences load growth, whether it be organic growth or due to initiatives like electrification, the Brooklyn hub can be used to interconnect future load-serving stations. The hub will not interfere with other system interconnections like Tier 4 or the LIPA PPTN. This slide is not addressing the subject of potential curtailments. That will be discussed later. Here we are specifically speaking about physical interconnections. Both the Tier 4 and LIPA PPTN interconnections are electrically and physically connected to a different part of the Con Edison system, so that construction and interconnections can move forward without being impacted by the construction of our hub, which is not connected to the system during its construction. I do note that to date, we have no insight and do not know which proposal will be awarded the LIPA PPTN solicitation by the New York ISO. Next slide, please. As most folks here already understand, projects interconnecting into New York must go through the Niso interconnection process, while projects are studied to make sure they interconnect reliably and meet all the reliability criteria. If projects don't meet criteria, then the developer is responsible for building system upgrade facilities, called SUFs, and/or system deliverability upgrades, or what we call SDUs. Our Brooklyn hub has specifically been designed to avoid the need for developers' local SUFs at the substation, because it will be designed to reliably accept single project injections of approximately 1,500 megawatts. As noted earlier, the hub is a make-ready station with all equipment already in service. So no station expansions with additional breakers are necessary to create open bus positions. The station is designed in a manner to avoid excessive substation bus flows, limiting overloads within the station. The illustration on the lower right shows how we would create substation diversity by alternating the offshore wind supply connections with outlet and load feeders, which enhances reliability. A substantial amount of wind output will be absorbed by the local load, and the excess will flow over the 8 outlet feeders, moving the power throughout the system. The hub is designed so that injections from large projects like offshore wind won't cause overloads within the station. Our design example is described on the lower left of the slide. For each of 3 large generation projects, single large injections are split into 2 smaller injections using 2 open bus positions. This will mitigate bus flows so that the flows throughout the station do not exceed normal or emergency ratings of the station equipment. Similarly, at neighboring Farragut, a single large injection would be split into 2 smaller proxy injections to ensure that local station equipment ratings are not violated. This means that 2 lines will bring a 1,500 megawatt injection from the inverter to the point of interconnection. To reiterate, the Brooklyn hub is designed to maintain reliability inside the station, thus avoiding SUFs for the developer. Next slide, please. Our design also addresses maintaining the reliability of the local system. This is where the electrical location of the hub is important. Take a look at the graphic in the lower right corner of the slide. This make-ready hub will intercept 3 existing 345 kV feeders currently connecting the Rainey and Farragut stations. Additionally, 2 feeders currently connected to nearby Farragut station will be relocated and connected to the Brooklyn hub. With 8 outlet feeders connected to the hub, up to 4,500 megawatts of injections from large offshore wind projects can easily be disseminated throughout the system to Rainey, Farragut, and East 13th Street stations to supply customer load. As previously mentioned, the hub is also designed to connect load-serving stations, so supply output from offshore wind will be absorbed by load connected to the hub. The connected load is expected to grow to close to 1,000 megawatts by 2035. So the combination of directly serving load and also being tied to the 8 outlet feeders with significant load behind them exemplifies why the Brooklyn hub will avoid the need for system-wide SUFs and SDUs. Next slide, please. Over the next 3 slides, I'm going to graphically depict what I've just described in the past 2 slides on slides 10 and 11. Here on slide 12 is a representation of a portion of the Con Ed's existing system. The Rainey 345 kV substation is connected to Farragut 345 kV station by 3 345 kV feeders, and both substations transfer power throughout the system through a number of other outlet feeder connections. Rainey, depicted in yellow, also supplies energy to a number of networks in Upper and Midtown Manhattan. In turn, Farragut, depicted in blue, also supplies energy to networks in Queens, Brooklyn, and Lower Manhattan. Next slide, please. This slide shows the Con Edison system with the Brooklyn Clean Energy Hub. The hub is located between Rainey and Farragut, intersecting the 3 feeders that currently connect Rainey to Farragut, creating 6 345 kV feeder outlet connections. Additionally, there are 2 other outlet feeders that were relocated from Farragut. As the offshore wind injections depicted in red connect to the hub, the power can be transferred to other parts of our system through the newly created outlet feeders. Additionally, we intend to transfer the Lower Manhattan load that is currently served by Farragut to the hub so that it can absorb wind injections. Next slide, please. As the system is ever-changing, so are our long-term system planning activities. Since the date of this filing, our plans continue to evolve, and here in slide 14, we are depicting the utilization of the Brooklyn Hub to supply additional future load-serving stations, such as Gateway Park in southern Brooklyn, which we plan to construct to help meet increased electrification load. Next slide, please. There are several challenges developers will encounter when connecting elsewhere on Con Edison's in-city system. Nearly all the POIs for existing generators are on the 138 kV system. The 138 kV system is not capable of accepting large injections from even a single offshore wind project. The single injection would need to be split into at least 4 or more smaller injections, meaning using at least 4 or more POIs where there already is a scarcity of potential interconnection points. If acceptable bus flows could even be designed and engineered at the existing 138 kV stations, the energy flowing into the particular 138 kV pockets would lead to severe overloads, requiring significant transmission additions to address resulting reliability violations. Some stakeholders have suggested that the POIs from the current existing generators be utilized for offshore wind. Initially, these POIs may not be available. Using the Niso's 2022 Draft Reliability Needs Assessment as a reference point, the reliability margins in New York City are much smaller than the historic reliability margins. In fact, the RNA study shows that in 2025, the margin is only 54 megawatts after the retirement and unavailability of in-city generation due to new emissions regulations. This implies that any existing generator greater than 54 megawatts cannot retire before replacement generation comes in service to offset the decreasing reliability margins. As the existing grandfathered generators are replaced with new resources, these new resources will also be required to comply with current NERC, NPCC, New York State Reliability Council, and local transmission owner planning, design, and performance criteria, which will likely lead to developers being responsible for the construction of SUFs. Developers locating at the Brooklyn Hub will not incur these SUFs. The Brooklyn Hub is an important first step that will jumpstart an orderly transition. It can enable the replacement of existing generation with clean energy resources with POIs that are available for offshore wind connection from day one at the hub. While single project large injections are encouraged by Con Edison to connect to the 345 kV system, expanding existing substations is costly. In many cases, Con Edison's 345 kV substations are space constrained and would need to be upgraded to GIS equipment. Even if physically feasible, there may not be enough transmission capability to transfer energy to other parts of the system. Staten Island is a good example. It is common public knowledge that existing generation on Staten Island is electrically bottled and would require extremely costly upgrades in the form of SUFs and SDUs to transfer the power off of Staten Island to other parts of the system. Connecting to the Brooklyn Hub would avoid these costly upgrades. Next slide, please. Offshore wind resources are variable resources. While the Brooklyn Hub is designed for up to 6,000 megawatts injection, it is expected that for the most of the hours across the year, the total offshore wind injection will be less than 6,000 megawatts. The curve on the right of this slide shows that even if 6,000 megawatts is connected to the hub, the full 6,000 megawatt output would occur very few hours in the year. And on average, the system will experience much less than a 6,000 megawatt hourly output due to wind blowing intermittently. Moreover, energy from variable offshore wind resources will compete with energy output from all other resources, regardless of where it connects in the city. The amount of curtailment at any point in time will depend upon how much the wind resources are producing, how much other existing resources can produce, the load, and NYSO's security constrained economic dispatch. In other words, curtailment will have to be managed with or without the construction of the hub, even if 6,000 megawatts connects at the hub. The hub does give its interconnected resources greater access to transmission support based on the electrical location, and this will be accounted for in NYSO's market dispatch. As we transition to clean energy, energy storage projects will integrate into the system and will enable more efficient utilization of the offshore wind energy. Further, on an ongoing basis, Con Edison continues to plan for its local transmission system and is currently designing projects to complement the future support of offshore wind utilization. Now I'll turn it over to Maggie Walters to review some of the engineering details considered during the hub development. Next slide, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Maggie Walters, and I am the Chief Engineer of Transmission Line Engineering for Con Edison. I've been with the company for over 19 years in various positions within transmission planning, substation operations, and now central engineering. As a reminder, if you have any questions about Deidre's portion of the presentation or what I'm about to review, please enter them into the Q&A section on the WebEx, and our team will review for inclusion in our Q&A section of today's technical conference. Today, I'll be walking you through some slides that will review options for routing approaches and interconnecting to our proposed clean energy hub. Next slide, please. Offshore wind developers will most likely take a two-stage approach to connecting to the Brooklyn Clean Energy Hub. As the offshore wind order suggests, the first stage will most likely utilize high voltage DC transmission cables through the Narrows into the upper New York Bay. As noted on this slide, developers could also avoid the Narrows completely through other land or water approaches to the hub. In response to the offshore wind orders directive, Con Edison conducted a review of industrial zoned properties that could be potentially suitable for offshore wind developers to site their DC converter stations. The review revealed 57 parcels of land in this geographic area and are depicted as red pins on this slide. You can see identified locations in Long Island City in Queens, Red Hook, Gowanus, and Sunset Park neighborhoods in Brooklyn, the North Shore of Staten Island, and various locations throughout northeastern New Jersey. Next slide, please. Once the power is converted to AC at the converter stations, the developers would then need to route high voltage AC cables to the Brooklyn Clean Energy Hub, as depicted here. Due to the locations of the DC converter stations and the location of the hub, developers have multiple options, both land and by sea, for routing these cables to the hub. We did receive some questions pertaining to the possible technical challenges of routing both high voltage DC and AC cables in the same waterways. We've spoken to a variety of cable manufacturers and large consulting firms about this issue. When designing transmission cables that will cross existing power cables, there are multiple means and methods to protect each cable, depending on installation characteristics. These protection methods could include applying a protective sleeve to the cables at each crossing to provide minimum separation, or a concrete mattress that can be laid between the different cables for protection. These means and methods are included in the approved project plan for the Champlain-Hudson Power Express project, which will involve the installation of high voltage DC cables through the Harlem River, where they'll be crossing existing Con Edison high voltage AC cables. Next slide, please. As the offshore wind developers review their routing approaches for high voltage AC to the hub, here are some considerations of land versus water approaches, as each option has its pros and cons. As discussed in our filing, we are estimating 345 kV transmission cables through the streets of New York City at approximately $50 million per mile. This estimate is based on our own experiences, as well as some conceptual studies we've completed with consultants. And the actual project costs are dependent on exact routing, cable ratings, and timeline of the projects. Underground transmission in New York City is a big focus for Con Edison, and my department in particular, as we are currently underway with the planning, design, and construction of 5 underground feeders in our service territory. From a spacing standpoint, underground transmission does allow for compact installation. Taken into account in the costs here are the challenges of routing transmission cable through the congested streets of New York City due to the scarcity of underground space and the construction coordination efforts required with the communities and outside agencies. Once the cable is installed and in service, maintenance practices should be considered. As a point of reference, Con Edison's periodic maintenance practices for underground feeders are typically focused on manhole inspections, and emergency fault locating and repair activities involve standard equipment and personnel. Con Edison estimates high voltage AC transmission cable installation through the water to be around $20 million per mile. While traditional water installations of transmission cable at these ratings were separated by phase and installed in separate trenches, new technology exists where all 3 phases can be installed together, and therefore offshore wind developers could explore compact installation for their AC cables to the hub. The construction associated with cable installation in the water results in less disruption to the community's daily life on land. Maintenance-wise, there are typically no periodic maintenance requirements for submarine cable, but when a corrective maintenance issue does occur, the fix is often expensive and time-consuming. Similarly, emergency fault locating activities and repairs are a lengthy process that requires specialized equipment and personnel in the order of 3 to 6 months, as opposed to 3 to 4 weeks for land cable. Next slide, please. The next segment of my presentation will take a closer look at the hub itself to understand the full extent of the make-ready solution that it will provide. This should address 3 points that are often top of mind of developers: availability of points of interconnection, the cost to interconnect, and outage availability. Next slide, please. The Brooklyn Clean Energy Hub will be repurposing a fossil generation site in Brooklyn. This picture shows a current aerial view of this site, which is comprised of a gas turbine site in red and the low pressure boiler house and switch house site in blue. Next slide, please. Here is a rendering of these two sites post-demolition. The previous GT site will be repurposed as our Brooklyn Clean Energy Hub, and the low pressure boiler house and switch house site will be used in the future for utility projects that support New York State's clean energy goals, such as to decarbonize our steam system. Next slide, please. And here's a rendering of our Brooklyn Clean Energy Hub once constructed. You can see the building roof with the transformer vault gratings, solar panels, and green roof setup. Next slide. On this slide, we're showing some options for feeder approaches by offshore wind developers to route their high voltage AC cable to the hub via land or water. Here, the red circles represent possible placement of vaults for these feeders on Con Edison land. I've included more than the necessary amount of feeders needed into the hub here to emphasize the multiple approaches possible. Next slide. Now let's look in more detail about what the offshore wind developers will encounter at the hub when they're routing their high voltage AC cables. This picture is a side view of the approach to the hub from the water. In green, you'll see Con Edison's existing feeders. In black is everything that Con Edison will be building at the hub. And in red are the facilities that are the responsibility of the developers. In the water, you'll see the cofferdam, followed by the receiving pit or vault on land. Those were represented as the circles on the previous slide. And the red cable, which will be pulled into the basement of the hub and connected to existing GIS, gas insulated switchgear, cable terminations. Inside our hub will be all the necessary GIS switchgear, circuit breakers, disconnect switches, bus work, associated protection and control systems, and auxiliary systems such as test equipment, fire protection equipment, DC systems, etc. What I just walked you through is explaining the available POIs that the Brooklyn Clean Energy Hub is providing. As a reminder, this is one of the main concerns for every developer looking to interconnect to Con Edison's system. Next slide, please. This concern is demonstrated with the graphic that Walter reviewed previously and as shown. The process to interconnect into our system is governed by the Niso interconnection process. Given this landscape, this process results in costly and time-consuming upgrades, which are not known until the end of the Niso interconnection study process, which could be 1 to 2 years in length. I'm going to walk you through an example of how these studies play out to compare to the benefits that the Brooklyn Clean Energy Hub provides. Next slide, please. The scenario I'll be discussing is what an offshore wind developer would encounter without the Brooklyn Clean Energy Hub by interconnecting to an existing substation. An offshore wind developer would propose their point of interconnection and enter into the various Niso interconnection studies. In this scenario, the offshore wind developer seeking to provide 1,500 megawatts of offshore wind is looking to connect to an existing ring bus with 2 AC feeds. The Niso Part 1 study identifies that this connection will require the installation of new circuit breakers, disconnect switches, cable terminations, and other associated equipment. For illustrative purposes, I'm estimating these costs to be approximately $60 million. As I described previously, this equipment is included in our filing for the Brooklyn Clean Energy Hub and would not be an additional expense for the developer. Next slide, please. Next, the project would go through the NYSO Part 2 study that would look at the impact of this study on the rest of, the impact of this project on the rest of the substation. In this scenario, due to the large amount of new generation injected into this existing substation, multiple circuit breakers, disconnect switches, and bus work would need to be replaced and upgraded as they are overloaded. Let's estimate those at $40 million for this scenario. Next slide, please. And finally, the project would undergo an SDU study as part of the class year interconnection process. And in this scenario, as would be at most, if not all, of our existing substations, a system deliverability issue has been identified, and a new transmission line will be required to make that offshore wind power deliverable. This one-line diagram only speaks to the upgrades needed at this substation for this new transmission project, but there would also be corresponding upgrades needed at the receiving substation of the new transmission line. A new transmission line and necessary station upgrades could be estimated at $300 million. Next slide, please. A final point here is to speak to schedule in addition to cost. All the upgrades shown here at the existing substation would need to be coordinated and scheduled with the rest of the system maintenance and capital outage work and within the NYSO outage scheduling rules. As Walter mentioned, typically our outage scheduling season runs from September through May with additional limitations through the winter season. Multiple elements in an existing substation cannot come out of service at the same time due to reliability considerations. Therefore, to execute all the upgrades seen here could cost around $400 million and could take a decade to complete. At the hub, our make-ready solution is truly that, as the hub is being designed to minimize cost and schedule implications for developers who choose to interconnect there. Now I'm going to turn the presentation back to Deidre to go through our final topic before Q&A. Thank you for your time today.
Next slide, please. One more slide, please. Thank you. Thank you, Maggie. So now I'll discuss the hub and the NYSO process considerations. As part of the NYSERDA RFP, developers have been encouraged to submit proposals utilizing the Brooklyn Clean Energy Hub as an alternative interconnection point. Proposals using the hub as its POI are not required to show a NYSO interconnection request. So when can a developer select the Brooklyn Hub as its POI? Once Con Edison receives cost recovery approval from the Public Service Commission for the Brooklyn Clean Energy Hub, it will initiate an update to its local transmission plan. In that update, it will notify the NYSO that the Brooklyn Clean Energy Hub is a firm project with an expected in-service date of 2027 to be included in the NYSO database. Once the hub is included in the NYSO database, developers may seek to initiate the formal interconnection process, including selection of the hub as the offshore wind project's POI, pursuant to the NYSO tariff. This concludes our presentation for today, and now I'll turn it over to Brad Weiner for the question and answer session. We'll take 2 minutes right now, if folks will stay on hold for a second, and I'm going to transfer things over to Brad. You could advance the slide, one more slide, please. Thank you.
All right. Greg, can I just get a mic check, please?
Sounding good.
All right. All right, good. I think we are good to go, separating ourselves and going from one room to another. So appreciate you bearing with us there. I am joined by Martin Pazak from our transmission planning organization. I'm Brad Weiner. I'm the director of transmission product development, and we are going to walk through some of the questions that we received both before this event as well as during. Before we get started, though, I want to thank everyone for spending some time with us. Appreciate Deidre and Maggie walking through the benefits and some technical details on the Brooklyn Clean Energy Hub. I'm going to turn it over to Martin to begin the discussion, very similar to the themes that we went through in the presentation, starting with some of the higher level and then getting down into some of the specifics of the hub itself. So Martin, if you would.
Sure. You want me to do it to yours or to mine?
You can do it through mine.
Can you be heard? Just a mic check. Can you hear me? Let me do it to mine.
Yes, clear, Martin.
Okay, technical difficulties, just checking again. Can you hear me? This is Martin Paszek.
Yes, very clear.
Thank you very much. So let me go to the first question. There was a question on slide 15. Where does the 54 megawatt number you stated come from regarding the maximum size of generator that can be retired? Let me try to answer that question. So going back to what Deidre just said a few minutes ago, so using the NYSO 2022 draft reliability needs assessment, or the RNA as it's usually known by as the reference point, the reliability margins in New York City are much smaller than the historical reliability margins. In fact, if you look at that draft report, the RNA study shows that in 25, just a few years from now, the margin is only 54 megawatts after the retirement and unavailability of certain city generation due to the DEC NAAQS emission regulations. This implies, and this is the key word, this implies that any existing generator greater than 54 megawatts that's located in New York City cannot retire before any new replacement generation comes in service to offset that, to really address the decreasing reliability margin. That was one question. There was also a question on slide 10, if we can go back to it. The question was, if there's time, can we talk through again how alternating offshore wind, 345 kV outer and load, improves diversity? As Deidre described, the station is really designed in a manner to avoid excessive substation bus flows, really to eliminate overloads within the station. And this is the key, this is within the station, not on the transmission system. And on a very high level, an injection at one bus section is really removed at the next bus section if you alternate supply and load. So if you do that, then you eliminate power flow through the station, really. So as compared to having two injections on two adjacent bus sections, where there will be additive, creating excessive bus flows. So I hope that I did address that question. Let me go to a few additionals. Maybe I'll mix a little bit. This is some that came before the tech conference. Let me go to this one. How will the new substation exacerbate or alleviate the transmission constraint between Staten Island and the rest of New York City? Also, I think Deidre made a point about the issue with Staten Island is a known fact that Staten Island is a battled area. The answer is really that the hub will not alleviate or exacerbate the transmission constraint between Staten Island and the rest of New York City. The location of the hub was specifically chosen to minimize the need for costly upgrades that other parts of our system would require. That's the answer to that question. Let me just take care of this. There was a question about, has Congested explored the costs and benefits of substation configurations that would support lesser generating capacity? The answer is yes. The Brooklyn Clean Energy Hub actually is designed for maximum efficiency, and it's more than simply a collection of offshore wind interconnection points. And I believe Deidre went through some of the aspects of it. The hub project, the Brooklyn Clean Energy Hub, changes the topology of our transmission system to route clean energy to really serve growing load centers in Brooklyn, Queens, and Manhattan, as well as providing access for that energy to the 345 kV backbone. It's really rightly sized for growth up to 6,000 megawatts of offshore wind. Take this one out. There was a question about what effects will the new substation have on the Long Island Public Policy Transmission Need project, for which the NYSERDA is now evaluating bids. We would say there is no impact. The Brooklyn Clean Energy Hub and a potential LIPA PPTN project can be constructed without any interference between each other. One does not preclude the other. Moreover, we believe that in order to meet New York State CLCPA goals, both LIPA PPTN and the hub should be implemented as soon as possible. There was a question, what is the basis for Congested assertion that other zone JPOIs held by fossil fuel generation are not likely to be available because such resources cannot disconnect from the grid if reliable needs are identified until the replacement resources that provide the necessary reliability contributions are online? It's a big question. The answer is, I think I talked about a little bit about it, but NISO RNA studies, and those are studies that can be accessed, right? They are showing or indicating narrowing reliability margins that would essentially impede a retire before replacement approach, right? For example, the New York City reliability margin 25 is 54 megawatts, as I stated a few minutes ago, per the 2022 reliability assessment draft results. Further, multiple grandfather interconnection points would need significant work in time to comply with current reliability standards. As such, we believe that the new interconnection points like those provided by the hub are needed for the state to achieve its CLCPA goals. There was a question about mesh-ready offshore wind. Okay. To what extent is the new substation comparable with a mesh-ready offshore wind transmission system as contemplated in the January 20th, 2022 Order on Power Grid Study recommendation? So a little bit about that. So the offshore mesh network creates redundancies for the individual offshore wind generators so that a single transmission line failure does not curtail the individual generators, right? Each DC cable carrying the offshore wind output to land will individually carry more energy. The land-based converter station may be larger, but the number of AC lines exiting the converter station will be sized to match the existing AC transmission substation. The proposed substation, the proposed Brooklyn Clean Energy Hub, can accommodate up to 6,000 megawatts of offshore wind. If the mesh network carries more than 6,000 megawatts, then additional POIs will be necessary, and some of the AC connections from the land-based converter stations will need to be diverted to other 345 kV substation, which may also require additional transmission upgrades. It's a big question and a big answer. I hope I did answer the question. were some questions, for example, does ConEd anticipate any impacts to operating reserves requirements? If so, could Con Edison share any site studies and or estimates of associated costs? The impact of intermittent renewables on the NYSO market operation should be directed really to the NYSO, and this is not really the place to really discuss such issues. Brad, you want to take you?
All right. Thank you, Martin. I appreciate it. We're going to go ahead and talk a little bit more about some of the technical type questions that we had received, as well as some of the business centric type questions that we received. So during the discussion on slide 8, we got a request to explain what we mean by double ring bus. So simply, ring bus topology is comprised of breakers, forming a circle or ring, right? So as it's shown on slide 28. So when you take a look at this presentation, hopefully that makes it clearer. The double ring joins these 2 rings in one common bus section, and then the topology has alternating connections of feeder transmission sources, load connections, back and forth. So that, kind of goes to the question that Martin addressed just a few minutes ago. A question came up on slide 10, how would SDUs be allocated amongst developers for these balanced against socialized cost of ratepayers, i.e. sharing 8 POIs of $1 billion, 125 per project? So Maggie kind of talked a little bit during the presentation, the way the costing would be applied for the individual projects that are interconnecting. And I got another question that's going to provide a little bit more clarity on that. And meaning that the cost of the SUFs and any SDUs, if they were identified during the class year process, the NYSO interconnection process, they would be allocated as per attachment S of the open access transmission tariff. So our solution provides the opportunity to reduce and significantly minimize the need for SUFs. We're going to talk about that in a second, to only those specific items on protection, control, and metering, as well as some other smaller items, and then minimizing significantly the need for an SDU. So it's our belief that once this hub is constructed, there will be minimal SUFs and SDU cost, and those will again be allocated as per the appropriate tariff language. Question came in, will the hub lines be existing substation be AC or DC? So the supply lines that are going to come into the hub are expected to be an AC connection. So as Maggie went through in her routing slides, if an offshore wind developer chooses to go from DC to a converter station, it would then be transformed to AC and then brought over into the hub through an AC cable. The site itself does not make provisions for a DC direct connection into the hub itself. It's all going to be AC connections. Question came in on slide 19. Does Con plan to utilize existing rights of way for its proposed underground terrestrial HVAC, or would it require new acquisition? So a couple of things when we were showing on those maps is we were demonstrating the optionality of routing feeders into the Brooklyn Clean Energy Hub. The developer, once they choose their route based on where their converter stations are going to be located, where their particular plot of offshore wind development will occur, will determine what their routing will be, either through the bay or through the water and or through terrestrial sources. So there won't be necessarily a right-of-way issue, and Edison would not be procuring those actual rights for the AC line. Just by a matter of process, in the city, the vast majority of the lines are installed in franchise routes within the streets of New York itself. We would anticipate this would be similar to what any routing terrestrial would be expected to go through, and they would require the appropriate permitting and license agreements as applicable. And we had another one that talked about, no, I think that's going to be it for the internal questions. And then we're going to go to some of the questions that we received during leading up to the event itself. So one of the questions that we got a lot, so I think Martin kind of hit all of them. And again, these were thematic, right? So they're not specifically questions that were from an individual submission, but more what we saw across the board. So some of these are going to answer some questions more directly, but others, hopefully the information will be helpful. So one of the questions that we got was around the $1 billion cost estimate, right? So we stated that the hub itself was going to cost $1 billion, and a couple of questions came in, well, how did Edison arrive at the $1 billion estimate? So Con Ed utilizes a internal process, formal process of estimating, in which we look at the construction, labor, equipment, and material costs associated with the scope of the work. The budgetary estimate that we put together as part of the submission would be very similar for those in the industry as an AACE Class 3 budgetary estimate. So it would be inclusive of the individual components that comprise the Brooklyn Clean Energy Hub, including the direct construction cost, overheads, and contingency. The estimate does not include land for the hub because we already own it, so there is no acquisition cost associated with that, or any of the specific costs associated with individual developers routing their individual AC feeders from their equipment to our equipment. So that is not covered in the estimate. This is specifically and limited to the Brooklyn Clean Energy Hub. The question that we got a lot was, has Con Edison explored the feasibility of siting and permitting 8 separate cable routes to connect the wind farms and the proposed hubs? So there's 2 underlining questions that are in that one sentence. So we're going to break them out just a little bit. The siting and the permitting of all cables connecting to the hub will be evaluated and subject to all applicable federal and state siting and permit requirements, and those will be the responsibility of the developer. Clearly, how a developer chooses to bring their feeders and the route that they choose to follow through to make that connection is going to have a lot of impact on what particular permits and what particular requirements that may be. So we leave that to the individual agencies to review. What we want to stress is that the hub provides optionality for both water and land approaches. Maggie showed that in the map that's above. We also want to note that these are generators that have successfully connected to the Con Edison station through the water from New Jersey to Brooklyn. So there has been some success in this particular area of getting these feeders in. Additionally, we are not aware of any fatal flaws that would make it impossible to run AC cables through the New York Harbor from a converter station located in Staten Island or in New Jersey. Question that came in was, how does Con Edison foresee coordinating construction activities among developers whose construction timelines will likely coincide and site access during operation if any equipment belonging to the offshore developer is placed on the site? Great question. As we mentioned, we've got the opportunity to bring up to 6,000 megawatts on the Brooklyn Clean Energy Hub, and clearly there will be multiple developers working in and around the site at one time. So in order to address that concern, and frankly, all of the concerns that we're seeing and we're hearing from the developer community about working with Con Edison to bring in transmission into and around the city and then connecting into those point of interconnections in our existing substations in the Brooklyn Clean Energy Hub, we established a new group. That group is the group that I have the pleasure of leading transmission project development. It's our responsibility to work with third-party clean energy transmission developers to ensure that their projects can be successfully built within our service territory. Our organization will guide the developers through our processes, as well as the challenges working in the New York City region that we have painstakingly experienced over the last 200 years of working. So we will be, myself and my team will be reaching out to many of you in the coming weeks and months and years as we look to meet the clean energy goals of this great city and the state itself. So question came in, what regulatory, technical, electrical, and physical specifications will CECONY require for the developer-owned converter stations and its associated leads lines into the Vinegar Hill Make-Ready substation? So as part of the process, especially that of the interconnection process, Edison provides developers with relevant and applicable standards associated with their interconnection. In general, we focus on the interconnection in the substation itself. Clearly, there's a coordination between the standards and the specifications of a developer, of the requirements with, say, the Niso metering, as well as coordinating with the unique circumstances of a particular substation. We do not, however, get specifically into giving direction or requirements outside of those things that could have coordination concerns on a developer's design with their cables and their converter stations. We have in the past and will continue to do so, provide input when asked based on our knowledge and our experience and our understanding of the subsurface 345 and 138 kV systems. So how does Con Edison develop a process for how the substation circuits would be allocated to developers should a project be approved? So we're going to defer back to the FERC's open access transmission rules, which require developers to interconnect through their interconnection process, and therefore we can't allocate bus positions or specific circuits for specific developers. This will give an opportunity for folks to select the Brooklyn Clean Energy Hub, go through the interconnection process, and we'll work with those that go and get awarded the positions accordingly. What, if any, cost responsibility will developers bear for the development of the proposed hub? So I want to kind of separate out a couple of things. For the process from the perspective of the hub itself, the developers, as it's proposed in our petition, are not responsible for reimbursing the cost of the hub. Clearly, during the NYSO interconnection process, as I mentioned earlier, there will be a limited number of system upgrade facilities that will be identified. Nominal as compared to some of the requirements if you were to interconnect into other areas or existing substations. Some of those things may include protection control, metering, and et cetera. Those costs will be assigned to the developer through the interconnection process and captured in the interconnection agreement. That will be the limitations of the cost responsibility of the hub. So a great question was asked, has Con Edison considered the potential impacts of delays to the hub's construction on offshore wind developers? I think as the vast majority of the folks who are on this call can appreciate and understand, there's always going to be a risk of installing new transmission and generation as you get into the construction of the particular substation. As Maggie talked about at length during her discussion, the challenges with doing an upgrade at an existing substation is it is dependent upon the outages required to make in the ties and make those modifications. And as we continue to see an increased number of interest in folks coming into the New York City area, looking into interconnection, the availability of those outages to make that work gets more and more difficult, right? When you start looking at 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 clean energy projects, especially when you start comparing them to the reliability needs as well. The Brooklyn Clean Energy Hub provides us the opportunity to build this out in such a way that that impact will be minimized. To the question itself, the schedule of the in-service date will be identified in the interconnection process and will be finalized in the interconnection agreement. It's still our belief that the Brooklyn Clean Energy Hub will be available in service and live before a offshore wind developer's current in-service date. Question came in about site allocation in relationship to the open access transmission tariff and the process. How does Con Ed foresee developers acquiring site control of the proposed make-ready substation infrastructure? I'm going to break that down a little bit. So as Maggie kind of showed, that we're going to work with the developers who are looking to bring in to route their cables. The expectation is their converter stations will be in a location other than the Brooklyn Clean Energy Hub, and it'll be routed into the hub itself. There will be various agreements that will be necessary, and the site control for the developers' feeders through our properties, both the hub and the surrounding properties that we own, will be negotiated agreements between the parties. At the end, I just want to note the Brooklyn Clean Energy Hub itself will stay with Con Edison at the end, and we'll just be turning over those particular easements required to get those feeders in and around the station. What work has Con Edison done to estimate the NYSO interconnection cost allocated for offshore wind projects interconnecting at the Brooklyn Clean Energy Hub? So this is a slightly loaded question because every individual project, as they go to interconnect into other areas, are going to be identified in the NYSO process. So this is no different, but I do want to make a very important distinction. Specific project interconnection costs determined through that process itself, and depending on the time and inclusion of other projects in the same class year. We've designed the hub to reduce the expected interconnection costs for going and bring a cable into the station itself. Additionally, as we talked about before, the ability to schedule the outages necessary to be able to make the actual connection into the hub is being addressed. We also acknowledge, as Maggie said in our conversation earlier, is that one of the big challenges we have is about the need of bringing a lot of power, significant amounts of power, and then the ability to get that power out, and ultimately and traditionally resulting in an SDU. Because of the way that this sub was designed, it's our belief that it was selected, the location was selected to significantly reduce the probability for the need of an SDU. So therefore, minimizing the uncertainty and cost associated with actually connecting to Brooklyn Clean Energy Hub. This is a bit of a repeat question, but I'll answer it anyways. As with all interconnections that require, will offshore wind be paying Con Ed directly or others for any of the included or excluded costs associated with being able to interconnect at the hub? Okay, so there are always going to be some cost associated with interconnecting a new feeder to a substation. Those are typically identified as those system upgrade facilities, and the developer is responsible to fund those identified upgrades. The developer, as per the ODE, is required to compensate the connecting transmission owner for whatever SUFs are required as part of that project. So will you be paying Con Edison directly for any work that you may have? For any identified SUF that is determined through the interconnection process and captured within the interconnection agreement, however slight and de minimis as we expect them to be, there will be an agreement of that developer to compensate Con Edison or any other CTO for that matter for those upgrades. The cost of constructing the hub will not be borne by the developers, I might add. It will be recovered pursuant to a cost sharing recovery agreement, which we will file for approval with FERC. So this is the last question of today, and then we'll turn it over to Greg to kind of wrap us up. Question is, why should the commission act on Con Edison's petition to approve the Brooklyn Clean Energy Hub? Con Ed supports the coordinated planning process, but the state's clean energy goals are ambitious, and we need to get started on them before this coordinated planning process is completed. As we've kind of talked about through this presentation, the availability of the required points of interconnect through our system are scarce. This is why the state enacted the Accelerated Renewable Energy Growth Act and why Con Edison has proposed the hub in response to the Public Service Commission's request to do as part of the implementation of this act. Finally, we reiterate here that the state has demonstrated its understanding of the importance of the hub by having NYSERDA make clear in the RFP that the hub can be included as a potential point of interconnection. Given all that is need to be done to reach the CLCPA's and very ambitious goals, the coordinated planning process is necessary to reach the state's final goals. But approving the hub will provide and answer the three questions that most CTOs receive from all developers during this process. It provides certainty about where a point of interconnection can be provided. Not only does it do that, but the point of interconnection are specifically and strategically placed within the electrical system to get the greatest opportunity, as Maggie and Deidre talked about earlier. Secondly, cost certainty, as we went through, is a huge conversation that we have frequently. Developers need to understand how much it's going to cost to interconnect. And the reality is our current process requires them to go through a very lengthy 1 to 2 year process to understand exactly what their cost of interconnections are. And with the increased number of individual companies looking to interconnect, not only for offshore wind, but for battery storage and other clean energy goals, those costs are expected to continue to rise. Walter talked at the introduction, if you look back at the history of an interconnection at West 49th Street, $300 million for one project. These project costs are going to continue to go up. The Brooklyn Clean Energy Hub provides us the opportunity for the developers to understand with more cost certainty what their interconnection costs are going to be. And finally, and probably the most significant of all the three benefits the Brooklyn Clean Energy Hub brings is the opportunity to be able to meet the commercial and service dates. We cannot stress that the amount of outage coordination required to be able to connect these large injections of power are going to be incredibly difficult for us to meet as we move forward. Brooklyn Clean Energy Hub provides us an opportunity in the station that was designed and developed and will be constructed in a way to minimize those impacts on the outages, therefore providing greater certainty and the ability for a developer to meet their commercial and service dates. All of this will help approving the Brooklyn Clean Energy Hub to achieve the state's goals and adopting the CLPA and Accelerated Transmission Act. Greg, I will turn it over to you to wrap us. Thank you all again for joining us today. We really hope that you took away some information, got some answers, and we look forward to working with you in the future. Greg?
Thank you, Brad, and thank you for the participants for joining us for this technical conference. A reminder that the slide deck and the recording of the Con Ed presentation will be made available on the Public Service Commission's website under case number 20-E-0197. Additionally, as mentioned earlier, there is an expectation that the PSC secretary may be issuing a notice in this case, providing an additional opportunity for interested parties to file comments related to this presentation. And finally, also as mentioned earlier, later today, an email from the offshore wind team will be sent out to NYSERDA's offshore wind email list, providing the details about the upcoming webinar that will provide a forum for parties interested in presenting proposed solutions for the offshore wind interconnection to offshore wind project developers and other interested parties, and for participants to ask questions of those presenters. If you're interested in presenting or registering for that webinar, please follow the guidance in the email that will come out this afternoon, or feel free to reach out to us as always at offshorewind@nyserda.ny.gov. Thank you again for joining us and have a great day.